Today I'm going to be sharing two different heart quilt patterns with you. I'm so excited to be sharing these two patterns because they are two different sizes. I'm going to walk you through these heart quilt tutorials and share a bunch of tips and tricks along the way. It will really help you piece these quilts a lot easier. So the first heart quilt pattern is this one, and it is more of a wall hanging or mini quilt size, and it comes together so fast. A great scrappy little quilt here too, isn't it? And then the next pattern is a fun pixelated heart pattern, and I'm going to share so many tips with you on bringing these squares together so fast. It'll make this quilt come together in such a breeze. So this one is a nice big quilt. You will love using this quilt. Probably you could even put it on a bed if you put a nice border on it, but it'll be nice to cozy up with on the couch while you're watching movies, especially on Valentine's Day. So be sure to look down in the description for links to these patterns, and then keep on watching for all of my tips and tricks. All right, so the first heart project I'm going to show you is this cute scrappy heart wall hanging or mini quilt. This is a kit I received from Reb's Fab Stash, and I think it's a lot of fun because what it's really showing is that you can take one element of a larger quilt and make it mini for a cute decoration around the house or a quick project to sew when you need to unwind or something like that. So this project came from the free pattern from Riley Blake Designs, All the Love Quilt, and I will link that in the description. So we are just making one block from this quilt, and you can see that there are some other cute blocks in the quilt that you could make that you could make individually as well, or you could make a whole larger quilt if you have time. So I'm going to work through the mini version of the quilt that's all cute and scrappy. So I already have all my cuts made. So these lighter background florals are all going to be the heart. And then I have my background pieces behind the heart, and then my scrappy border, and then the outer border as well. So the first pieces I'm going to be working with are all the pieces that make up the heart. All right, so I have all of the elements ready to work through this heart pattern. So I'm actually going to start at the bottom because of the order I have them, but I want to show you the elements that will come together to make this quilt. So the first two are going to make up the bottom point of the heart, and they're the side blocks right here. So what I'm going to be doing is stitch and flip across here. So I'm going to stitch corner to corner on this block. I'm going to use my diagonal seam tape. You could draw a line corner to corner and sew across the line as well. And then we'll trim 1/4 of an inch away from the line and press. So that's that stitch and flip. So these are making up the corners of the bottom of the heart here. And then this is one that I'm going to have to do one side at a time on. So I have the heart fabric here. This is going to make up the heart, and then the background fabric here on the corner. And this is going to make up one side of the point. So I'm going to sew corner to corner here, and it's going to be the same thing on all of these. We're doing stitch and flip. So once I sew this side, and trim and press, I can sew the other side on. So here we have the top arcs of the heart, and it's the same thing. We are going to be sewing corner to corner and then trimming them off. And I didn't pin these the right way, and it's a good thing I just noticed it because I'd be sewing in the wrong direction and mess it all up. So I'm going to be sewing along here. And sometimes I like to bring my diagrams over to the sewing machine so that I make sure I'm not sewing across wrong corners and things like that, because that would not be fun to do. And then this one is the middle of the heart with the background fabric to the heart pinned onto the bottom corners to do that stitch and flip sewing. So I'm going to go stitch all of these, and then I'll be trimming them and pressing them to bring the heart together. So now I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away from all of these stitching on all these stitch and flips. So now that we have all of the elements for the heart complete, we're going to start sewing the rows together. So here with the arcs of the heart, I'm going to bring them right sides together, put a few pins in, and sew a 1/4 inch seam. This center strip of the heart is already completed. So then down here, I'll just need to be sewing these together as well. A little tip to try to get this seam here to line up is you could mark a 1/4 inch in and you'll feel where the points meet, and that's where you will want to sew. I'm going to, since I can feel where those points are, put a pin there to make sure that I keep this nice and straight for sewing that 1/4 inch seam. And then I'm going to pin these together right sides as well. Now once I get this sewn, I'm also going to need to add this side on as well, and I'll do that in the same manner. Then I'll press all of these seams and bring the rows together. So since the measurement of the top of my heart was off a little bit, I matched up the center point on here. I found the center point on the center piece, lined it up with the seam to make sure everything was straight, and then I'm just going to trim off. It was about 1/4 inch. So I don't know if my cutting was off a little bit or the measurements given, but I think this will work out just fine, still have the same look. So now we're going to start the scrappy border. We'll need 3 blocks for the side and 5 for the top. All right, so to piece my scrappy border, I'm going to stack them in the order that I plan them out and put them on a design board so I can sew them in order. All right, so now that we have all the strips sewn, the first thing we're going to do is sew the scrappy sides onto the heart. So I'm going to sew these on and press the seams. All right, now that the sides are sewn on and pressed, I'm going to attach the top and bottom of the scrappy patchwork border. All right, now that we have all of the scrappy sides on, we just have the solid border to add. So you can see we have 2 longer strips and 2 shorter strips. We're going to add the 2 shorter strips on first, and I'm going to add mine onto the side of the block. So a 1/4 inch seam and press, and then add the top and bottom on. And then the top of this little mini wall hanging will be finished. All I'll need to do is quilt it. So quick little project here. Here's my finished mini quilt with the heart and the scrappy border. I think it turned out really cute. This is a great project if you want to practice your stitch and flip and just make a small project that you could finish in a weekend. So now I'm going to move on to the larger quilt that I'm going to work on. It is another free pattern, and this is a pixelated heart. All right, so here are all my squares cut for this pixelated heart pattern. Now, one thing I would like to show is that all of these squares are the same size. So they are all cut to 5 inches. We have background squares and the squares that will make up the heart. I chose different shades and tone-on-tone designs for my background squares because I did want this to have a little bit of a scrappy feel. You could do all a solid color. And then I used different fat quarters and different lines of fabric to make up the heart, again, so it would have a scrappy feel to it. Now, something I want to point out that you could always do if you find a pattern you love, but maybe 75 by 75 is a larger quilt than you were wanting to make. You could always cut your fabric and scraps when all the blocks are the same size easily to a different size. So you could go as small as 3 inches, or you could even go larger if you wanted to make a quilt even huger than this. You could add rows to the top and bottom of background squares. There's a lot of things you could do to make this the size that you want. Now, when I work through this pattern, I'm going to work through 1 block at a time, starting with block 1. So I'll have a lot of background squares in the grid and just 3 of my heart fabrics. The pattern does suggest to press the seams open, so I'm going to go ahead and follow that suggestion just to make it easier on me for meeting up all the seams. So I'm going to work through each of these, and like I said, this is a free pattern, so I'll link it in the description as well. All right, so the first grid that I'm going to sew, and all of the grids actually, have 5 blocks by 5 blocks. So I've labeled each row with a pin that is marked number 1. And I'm going to keep this pin inserted into the first block in the row so I know which block is the first block in the row. And what I'm going to do is stack them in order on top of each other to take to the sewing machine. And then what I'm going to do is put a clip holding them together that is marked with a number 1. And as I sew these blocks together, I'm going to keep the clip on the squares that are not sewn onto the strip yet. This is going to help me keep everything organized so I can go to the sewing machine and sew this whole thing together by chain piecing a web holding this whole block together so that it's really easy to keep it organized. So I'm going to place this first row on a design board. This is a design board that I made, and I will link I'll link in the description of this video to how I made these super easy. So I'm going to keep stacking all these together and putting a corresponding clip onto them. And see, when I place them on the board, that's going to help me know which stack these all are if they get out of order as I'm working. So check this out. So when I sewed these rows together, I didn't snip the threads. So it kept my grid of blocks all together. It makes it so much easier to keep this in order and sew everything together. Now I pressed my seams open per the suggestion of the pattern. And what I'm going to do is just line up these seams and put a pin in it. So row 1 is right sides together with row 2, and I'm going to make sure this is all lined up and sew this entire block together. I'm going to use this same method to create all 9 of these blocks. Doing this, I think, makes it come together so much easier. This is a really fun tip, making this kind of net or web of threads to hold this all together. Now, when I go to press this later, when I press the seams open, I am going to need to snip these threads. It makes it a little bit easier. You see how it's kind of like curved up? When I go to press them, I'll snip all those threads so I can press them open per the pattern. If you want to press one way or the other, you may not need to, but I'm going to go ahead and follow the pattern suggestion and press them all open. So just a little heads up that you may need to snip those depending on how far apart your threads are. So I'm going to sew this block together, and then I have block 2 all prepped to sew as well. I'm going to do those in that same order with my pins and with my clips that have numbers on them. Then I'll give you a look at this quilt when it is all finished. So the pixelated heart is finished, and I am loving this quilt. I can't even show it all to you. It is so big. So take a close-up look at it now and just admire all these squares and how quickly they came together using those tricks I shared with you. Isn't that web piecing so handy? I absolutely love it. It keeps everything so organized. All right. As I put these quilts together, I mentioned a few videos that I have recorded previously that would be really, really helpful for you. One is to create those marking pins that I used, and another is for those design boards. So you can now click and check out the tutorials on that, as long as YouTube's working for me. But they should be up here on the screen, and I definitely put them down in the description below. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.